My name is Daniel. I'm 39, and for most of my adult life I thought I had built something solid. I wasn't rich, but I was steady. 8 years married to Claire, a woman I believed was my partner in every sense of the word. I ran a mid-sized construction company, the kind of business where I knew my employees by name and shook the hands of my clients. I wasn't flashy. I didn't gamble or drink away money. I invested carefully. I bought a couple rental properties. I even let my younger brother Adam in on some of those investments, partly because he always seemed like he was drifting and I wanted to give him something stable to hold on to. Adam and I were only 3 years apart, but sometimes it felt like a whole generation. I was the responsible one, the boring one. He was the charming talker, the one who had a new scheme every year: startups, day trading, crypto, all that. Most of it fizzled, but our parents always gave him the benefit of the doubt. I used to think he just needed structure, which is why I let him in on the real estate deals. I figured owning something tangible might ground him. With Claire, things seemed good. She had her quirks, she liked control, and she could be cold when she wanted to be, but I brushed that off as just differences in personality. We had a routine. She handled the household finances because she was better with spreadsheets than I was, and I trusted her. Completely. Too much, as it turned out. For years, I lived under the assumption that my life was stable. My company wasn't booming, but it paid the bills, and then some. My marriage had its ups and downs, but nothing that set off alarms. My brother annoyed me sometimes, but I thought family was family. Then one Tuesday morning, everything collapsed. Two detectives walked into my office while I was reviewing blueprints with a client. They asked me to step outside. I thought maybe there had been an accident on one of my sites, or maybe a permit issue. Instead, they presented a warrant: fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion. I laughed at first, genuinely laughed, because it was so absurd. But when they started listing off wire transfers, forged contracts, and documents with my signature, my stomach dropped. I tried to tell them it had to be a mistake, but they weren't joking. They took my computer, boxed up my files, and walked me out in front of my employees. The look on my foreman's face, that mix of shock and disappointment, burned worse than the cuffs on my wrists. I didn't know it yet, but that was the first domino. And once it fell, everything else I thought was stable came crashing down with it. The first night after my arrest, I sat in a holding cell staring at a wall that smelled of bleach and rust. I kept telling myself it had to be a mistake. I had nothing to hide. My books were clean, my taxes filed on time. Any investigator worth their salt would see that. But then my lawyer, a guy named Martin I'd worked with on some business contracts, came to see me. He didn't look optimistic. "They've got paperwork, Daniel," he told me, flipping through a thick folder. "Wire transfers from your accounts to offshore entities. Deeds with your name on them. They even have correspondence, emails from your address authorizing payments." I almost laughed again. I never wrote those emails. I don't even know how to wire money offshore. He looked at me carefully, like he was measuring whether I was lying. "If what you're saying is true, then someone set you up." That phrase, "set you up," echoed in my head long after he left. But who would even bother? I wasn't important enough to frame. I didn't have enemies. My employees liked me, my clients respected me. The only people who had enough access to forge my signature and know my accounts were family. That thought made my stomach twist, so I shoved it aside. The next few weeks were a blur of hearings, paperwork, and humiliation. The DA wanted to make an example out of me, a corrupt contractor skimming money off the books. News articles popped up online with my mugshot. Clients started pulling out of projects. My reputation, which had taken me nearly 20 years to build, was crumbling overnight. Claire visited me once during those early weeks. She cried the whole time, wringing her hands like a grieving widow. She told me she'd stand by me, that she believed in me. I clung to that, because what else did I have? But little things started nagging at me. The way she avoided my eyes when I asked about the company finances. The way she cut visits short, always claiming she had to deal with the lawyers or manage the house. And Adam, my brother, suddenly stopped taking my calls. My parents said he was too stressed to deal with everything. It wasn't until Martin showed me copies of the forged contracts that the cracks turned into fissures. The handwriting wasn't mine, but it was familiar. The loops, the pressure, the way certain letters leaned. It looked an awful lot like Adam's. Still, I told myself I had to be imagining things. My own brother? My wife? No, it couldn't be. But deep down, I already knew the truth. The only people close enough to gut me this precisely were the two people I trusted most. And the idea of that truth was far scarier than prison. The moment I realized the handwriting looked like Adam's, something inside me broke. Still, I needed proof. My lawyer and I started combing through every document the prosecution had, line by line. And that's when the pieces started to line up. There were emails supposedly sent from my account authorizing payments. But the writing style didn't sound like me. They used words I never used, phrases I'd never type. One even ended with "Best, Daniel," and I've never signed an email that way in my life. The IT specialist Martin brought and said the emails had been routed through a spoofed server. Someone with access to my home network could have set it up easily. That meant whoever framed me had been in my house. When Claire visited again, I asked her directly, "Did Adam ever use my office computer?" She hesitated, then said, "Maybe once or twice, I don't know." Her voice cracked on the word maybe. That was the moment I knew. 2 nights later, I got confirmation. A junior investigator slipped and mentioned that Adam had already been questioned as a cooperating witness. Cooperating? Against me? My brother. I begged Martin to dig deeper, and he did. Bank records showed multiple transfers from my accounts to an LLC tied to Claire's maiden name, a shell company. The signature on those documents was forged, but legally, it was mine. When I finally confronted Claire during a supervised visit, she didn't deny it. She just stared at me with cold eyes I'd never seen before. "You were too blind to see it coming," she whispered, low enough that the guard didn't catch it. "You make money, Daniel, but you don't know what to do with it. Adam and I, we have plans. We're building something real." I couldn't breathe. My wife, my brother, lovers, partners in crime. The two people I trusted most had been sleeping together behind my back while systematically dismantling my life. They hadn't just stolen money. They'd stolen my name, my reputation, my sense of security. And now they were using the courts to bury me alive while they walked free. That night, lying on the thin cot in my cell, I promised myself one thing. If I ever got out of this, I wouldn't just clear my name. I'd take everything from them, piece by piece. Because family betrayal isn't just a wound, it's a debt. And I was going to make sure they paid it in full. By the time the case went to preliminary hearings, the noose felt tight around my neck. The DA stood in front of the judge and painted me as a greedy contractor who thought he was smarter than the system. They had evidence stacked high, documents with my forged signature, fake email chains, even testimony from Claire and Adam. Yes, they both testified. My wife sat there, swearing under oath that she'd noticed suspicious behavior from me. She claimed she'd begged me to stop moving money around, that I'd yelled at her for not trusting me. Adam, my brother, looked me dead in the eye from the witness stand and said I'd pressured him into helping cover up shady transfers. He framed himself as the reluctant accomplice, too loyal to say no. The courtroom was full of people who'd once respected me, clients, extended family, even old friends. I could feel their eyes on me, all of them silently asking, "How could you do this?" I wanted to scream that I hadn't, that the real liars were sitting right there, hand in hand beneath the table. But I stayed quiet, because Martin told me losing control would only feed the DA's narrative. Afterward, when I was led back in cuffs, I caught a glimpse of Claire and Adam in the hallway. She had her hand on his arm, comforting him like he was the victim. And for the first time, I didn't see them as family anymore. I saw them as co-conspirators, a team that had spent months planning every detail of my downfall. The plan was almost perfect. Claire had access to my office computer, Adam had my trust in the business ventures, and together they created a paper trail that made me look like the mastermind. They knew I didn't micromanage the books. I was too busy running job sites. They knew I trusted Claire to manage the home finances. They knew my signature well enough to fake it. The DA filed for a full trial. If convicted, I was looking at years in prison. Meanwhile, Adam and Claire were free, living in my house, spending my money, and smiling for the cameras like they were the ones wronged. It was almost enough to break me. Almost. But then Martin leaned across the table one night, slid over a document, and said, "Daniel, I think we've got our crack in the wall." It wasn't proof yet, but it was a start. A transfer they hadn't covered as cleanly. A signature too sloppy. A company name tied too closely to Claire. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope. If they thought I'd roll over and die in prison, they'd underestimated me. The day the trial date was set, It felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. I'd spent nearly 2 decades building a reputation as a straight-shooting contractor, someone who worked hard and paid fair. Now my name was plastered across headlines as a fraudulent businessman. The phone in Martin's office never stopped ringing, clients pulling out, subcontractors refusing to work with me, banks freezing lines of credit. My company was dying before my eyes, and I was powerless to stop it. Worse than the business fallout was my family. My parents visited me once, early on. I'll never forget the look in my mother's eyes, disappointment, sorrow, maybe even shame. She didn't outright say she believed Claire and Adam, but her silence spoke volumes. My father kept his arms crossed the whole time, jaw clenched tight. They left after 15 minutes, and I didn't hear from them again. Adam had poisoned the well, making it sound like I'd dragged him into something criminal. I tried to hold on to some sense of normalcy in jail. Read books, did push-ups, kept my head down. But the gnawing thought never left me. Claire and Adam were free. They were probably sleeping in my bed, eating in my kitchen, laughing about how thoroughly they'd destroyed me. The lowest point came during a hearing when the DA presented a slideshow of evidence. They displayed my supposed emails on a big screen, lines and lines of text that weren't mine. They showed bank statements with highlighted transfers. The jury nodded along, and I could feel their judgment radiating toward me. I wanted to scream, to rip the screen down and shove the proof of forgery in their faces. But I had nothing concrete yet. After court that day, Martin told me bluntly, if we don't find a hole in their case, you're looking at a minimum of 5 years. Maybe more. That night, lying on my cot staring at the ceiling, I felt the closest I'd ever come to giving up. Not just on the trial, but on everything. But then I thought about Adam smirking on the witness stand, about Claire whispering that I'd been too blind to see it coming. That rage pulled me back from the edge. If they wanted me to rot in prison, I'd make damn sure they joined me there. Or worse, walked out penniless and disgraced. I didn't know how yet, but I knew one thing. I wasn't done fighting. Jail has a way of stripping a man down to the bones. No suits, no titles, no reputation, just a number stitched on your chest and a thin mattress to your name. Days blurred into nights. Meals were the same bland trays, conversations the same recycled complaints. The only thing that kept me tethered to myself was the file Martin brought me every week, thick with photocopied documents. I studied those papers like my life depended on it, because it did. Every night, under the flickering light in my cell, I traced signatures, compared dates, reread email chains until the words blurred. Most men in there played cards to kill time. I built timelines in my head. It was during one of those nights that I noticed the first real mistake. A property deed transfer, supposedly signed by me, dated on a day I knew I was out on a job site from dawn to dusk. I still had the work log with my foreman's initials. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I flagged it to Martin, and he raised an eyebrow. Could be sloppy forgery, he said. If we can line up enough of these inconsistencies, the prosecution's case starts to wobble. That was the first spark of hope I'd felt in months. I started looking harder, not just at what was there, but what was missing. That's when I saw it. One LLC, buried deep in the stack, tied to a name that made my stomach twist. Claire's maiden name. A company she and Adam had clearly used as a shell to funnel money. They'd been so careful about hiding trails under my name, but this one slip tied directly back to her. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, heart pounding, because for the first time since this nightmare began, I had leverage. Of course, leverage doesn't mean freedom. I was still behind bars, still eating watery oatmeal for breakfast, still walking into hearings in shackles. But mentally, the tide was turning. Claire stopped visiting me altogether. No more crocodile tears, no more playing the dutiful wife. Adam, from what I heard, was living large, driving my truck, flashing money at bars, acting like a man who'd finally made it. They thought I was finished. But sitting on that thin cot, gripping the folder of documents with shaking hands, I whispered to myself, "You're the ones who are finished. You just don't know it yet." The slip with Claire's maiden name gnawed at me for days. It was too obvious, too careless for someone as meticulous as her. That's when I realized something important. Arrogance makes people sloppy. They'd gotten so comfortable framing me, so confident the DA had swallowed their story, that they didn't bother covering every track. Martin filed motions to subpoena additional financial records tied to that Shell LLC. The prosecution fought it, but the judge allowed limited access. When the new records came in, it was like opening a floodgate. Deposits from accounts linked directly to Adam. Withdrawals that matched Claire's credit card payments. Designer clothes, fancy dinners. A trip to Miami they'd taken while I rotted in county jail. I felt sick reading it, but also vindicated. Each receipt, each transfer was another crack in their wall. Then came the real jackpot. Martin brought me a set of email headers, metadata from the supposedly incriminating messages. A forensic IT specialist confirmed that while the emails were spoofed to look like they came from me, the originating IP addresses matched the Wi-Fi at my own house. The same network Claire and Adam had free access to. It wasn't a smoking gun yet, but it was damn close. The D8 didn't want to hear it, of course. They doubled down, saying anyone could have used my Wi-Fi. But Martin pressed harder, demanding a deeper digital audit. Slowly, painfully, the narrative began to shift. Meanwhile, I started hearing whispers from inside the jail. A buddy of Adam's had been bragging at a bar, running his mouth about how Adam had finally outsmarted his brother. Apparently, he'd been flashing cash, boasting that the house and the business were as good as his. I couldn't prove it in court yet, but I knew time was on my side. Their arrogance was catching up with them. One night, lying on my cot with the folder on my chest, I realized something. This wasn't just about proving my innocence anymore. It was about flipping the entire story. They had framed me so neatly, made me the villain in everyone's eyes. I didn't just want freedom, I wanted the truth dragged out into the light. Because the best revenge wouldn't be yelling at them in anger. It would be watching their smug smiles vanish as the world finally saw them for what they really were: liars, thieves, and traitors. The day everything shifted started like any other. Me in an orange jumpsuit, wrists chained, shuffling into court while people whispered from the gallery. I'd gotten used to the looks by then. Pity from some, disgust from most. But Martin had a glint in his eye when he leaned over and whispered, "Today's the day we start cutting their legs out." The prosecution strutted in with their usual air of confidence. The DA laid out the same tired story: greedy contractor, offshore transfers, betrayed wife and brother reluctantly forced to testify. Then Martin stood up, calm as a surgeon, and slid a stack of papers across the table. "Your Honor," he said, "we've uncovered new evidence that directly contradicts the state's narrative." He started with the receipts. Thousands of dollars spent at boutiques, restaurants, and travel agencies, all traced back to the very LLC supposedly controlled by me. Only the cards used belonged to Claire. The DA tried to object, but Martin pressed on, laying out timeline after timeline. Then came the email analysis. The forensic IT expert took the stand and explained, in plain terms, how the spoofed messages had been sent through the Wi-Fi at my house. Claire's laptop had been logged into the router during those exact timestamps. Adam's phone, too. I watched the jury's faces carefully. For the first time, I saw doubt. Real doubt. The final blow came when Martin introduced the property deed transfer. "Mr. Daniels," he asked the handwriting analyst, "does this signature match my client's?" "No," the expert said confidently, "but it is consistent with known samples of Adam Daniels' handwriting." The courtroom buzzed. Adam shifted in his seat, his confident smirk flickering. Claire's jaw tightened, but she kept her gaze forward. The judge called for recess, and as I was let out, I caught a glimpse of them in the hallway. Claire's face was pale, Adam's lips tight as he hissed something at her. For the first time, they looked less like victors and more like cornered animals. When we got back into court, the DA's swagger was gone. Their case wasn't crumbling, it was collapsing. They moved to delay, to review the new evidence. Martin objected. The judge allowed it, but warned the prosecution they'd better have answers. That night, sitting on my cot, I felt something I hadn't in months: relief. For so long, the world had believed I was a fraud. Now, for the first time, the truth wasn't just mine, it was on record. But I wasn't satisfied. Clearing my name was only step one. The Real Justice would be watching Adam and Claire face the same destruction they'd so carefully crafted for me, and I was going to make sure of it. When the DA finally dropped the charges against me, it wasn't some triumphant movie moment. There were no apologies, no press conferences clearing my name. I just walked out of the courthouse into the afternoon sun, free but hollow. My reputation was still in tatters, my business hanging by a thread. People remembered the mugshot, not the dismissal. But I hadn't spent all those months in jail just to walk away quietly. Claire and Adam had gutted my life. Now it was my turn to carve theirs apart. Legally, methodically, piece by piece. First was the divorce. I filed immediately, citing adultery and financial fraud. My lawyer didn't pull punches. He went after every asset Claire thought she controlled. The house, the cars, even the joint accounts she'd drained. She fought, of course. She showed up to mediation with crocodile tears and claimed she'd only done what she did because I intimidated her. The mediator wasn't buying it, not after seeing the financial records tied directly to her spending sprees. The court froze her accounts while the case dragged on. Suddenly, the woman who once draped herself in designer clothes was showing up in off-brand shoes. I'd be lying if I said it didn't give me some satisfaction. Then came Adam. He wasn't just my brother anymore. He was my former business partner. And that meant I had legal grounds to sue. With Martin's help, I filed for breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, and embezzlement. We forced the sale of our joint investment properties, and the proceeds went straight to covering the legal mess he'd dragged me into. Adam had to cough up restitution he didn't have. The smug charmer who once bragged about beating the system was suddenly drowning in debt. On top of that, the DA, embarrassed by how badly they'd been misled, shifted their sights onto Adam and Claire. They weren't convicted of everything, but fraud charges stuck. Watching them walk into court in handcuffs, the same way I had months earlier, felt like balance restored. It wasn't quick, but by the time the dust settled, Claire was living with her parents, Adam was sleeping on a friend's couch, and every dollar they tried to steal was either seized, frozen, or gone. They had tried to bury me. Instead, they dug their own graves. And I made damn sure they stayed in them. Freedom feels different when you've had it taken away. For months after the charges were dropped, I still woke up at 5 a.m., expecting the clang of cell doors. I still ate meals in silence, as if someone would bark at me for lingering too long. But slowly, the weight began to lift. Rebuilding wasn't easy. My company had lost clients. My name was mud in the industry, and people who once shook my hand with pride now avoided eye contact. But I started small. A renovation here, a repair job there. Word of mouth spread. Daniel's back, and he's as solid as ever. A few loyal clients gave me another chance. Each successful job was a brick laid in rebuilding not just my business, but my reputation. Meanwhile, Claire's life unraveled. The divorce finalized, and she walked away with little more than her clothes and whatever jewelry the court didn't seize. She tried to play the victim online, posting vague sob stories about toxic men and starting over. But people aren't stupid. Word got around. Friends she once flaunted disappeared. Invitations dried up. Adam fared even worse. He was blacklisted in business circles, sued by more people than just me, and neck-deep in debt. Last I heard, he was working under the table for a buddy, living in a rented room above a garage. The charm that once carried him had worn thin. Nobody wanted to bankroll a con artist anymore. My parents? That's complicated. They were embarrassed, angry at Adam, but too ashamed to face me fully. We speak occasionally, but there's distance now. Blood may be thick, but betrayal stains it. As for me, I'm not bitter. Not anymore. I used to dream of grand revenge, of screaming in their faces, of making them feel the humiliation I endured. But in the end, the quiet destruction of their own lives was enough. I'm still here, still standing, still building. This time, a life that no one else gets to touch.